Before we begin, please be advised that this story contains themes of disappearance and psychological distress, and may be unsettling for some listeners. There's a house in Willow Creek, California, that sits quietly on Elm Street. Not a grand Gothic mansion that screams haunted, but a perfectly ordinary two-story colonial, painted a faded robin's egg blue. It's the kind of house you'd pass every day on your commute, barely registering its existence, simply another brick in the wall of suburbia. Yet for decades it has stood empty, an anomaly, a gaping wound in a town where real estate is gold. Its windows are dark, often reflecting the sky like vacant eyes, its porch swing motionless, a silent testament to forgotten afternoons. And the silence around it isn't just quiet. It's a heavy, suffocating blanket that seems to absorb all sound, leaving an unsettling void. You could walk past it 100 times and never truly see it, but once you know its story, once you understand the profound absence it represents, you can never unsee the chilling truth hidden behind that faded blue paint. Because that house, that unassuming blue house on Elm Street, holds a secret so profound, so utterly baffling, that it has haunted Willow Creek for nearly 30 years. It's the house where the Miller family lived, the last family to ever live there. And one crisp October morning, just like the leaves falling from the trees, they simply vanished. Michael Miller was a software engineer, sharp, ambitious, and always looking for the next big challenge. He'd moved his family from the bustling, relentless tech scene of Silicon Valley to the quieter, more idyllic Willow Creek in the late 90s, seeking a slower pace, more green space. His wife, Emily, was an artist, her vibrant personality a perfect counterpoint to Michael's logical mind. She found inspiration in the town's natural beauty, already sketching plans for a home studio. And then there was their daughter, Jessica, a bright-eyed 7-year-old with a contagious laugh, a boundless imagination, and a penchant for drawing fantastical creatures that often adorned the family fridge. They were, by all accounts, the quintessential American dream family, brimming with optimism. They had just bought the house on Elm Street, drawn by its spacious yard, its sturdy bones, and the promise of a fresh start, a place to truly put down roots. They were renovating, planting flowers, introducing themselves to neighbors, becoming an integral, welcomed part of the community. They were present, vibrant, alive. Their disappearance wasn't a sudden, dramatic event that unfolded in a blaze of sirens and flashing lights. It was a creeping dread, a slow realization that something was terribly wrong. The last anyone saw them was on a Friday evening, October 13, 1995, a date that, in retrospect, feels almost too on the nose, shrouded in an eerie, unsettling irony. Michael had stopped by the local hardware store for some paint samples, chatting amiably with the owner about his ambitious weekend projects. Emily had picked Jessica up from her after-school art club, laughing with the teacher about Jessica's latest masterpiece, a glitter-infused unicorn with 3 eyes. Neighbors saw them pull into their driveway, saw the lights come on in the house, heard the faint echo of Jessica's excited chatter. A perfectly normal, unremarkable Friday night. Saturday came and went. No one thought much of it. Michael often worked on weekends, sometimes even bringing projects home. Emily might have been engrossed in a new art project, lost in her creative world. Jessica, well, she was a kid, probably playing in her room or outside in the yard. But Sunday morning, Mrs. Henderson, their next-door neighbor, a woman of meticulous routine and keen observation, noticed something odd. The newspaper, which Michael retrieved with almost military precision every morning, was still on the porch, unopened. The porch light, which they usually turned off before dawn, was still burning, a pale glow against the rising sun. A small, almost imperceptible detail, easily dismissed by most, but it snagged at Mrs. Henderson's finely tuned intuition. By Monday morning, the newspaper was still there, now damp with dew, and Jessica hadn't shown up for school. Her best friend Sarah had waited for her at the bus stop, alone. Mrs. Henderson, a woman who prided herself on being neighborly but not nosy, finally, reluctantly, called the Willow Creek Police Department. What the officers found when they entered that robin's egg blue house would baffle investigators for decades, becoming a cold case that consumed careers and shattered reputations. There was no forced entry, no broken windows, no jimmied locks. The front door was simply unlocked, ajar, as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. Inside, the scene was disturbingly, unsettlingly normal. The breakfast dishes sat in the sink, half-finished. A bowl of cereal with a spoon still in it, milk starting to curdle. A coffee cup with a cold, brown ring at the bottom, a faint lipstick smudge on the rim. The toaster was still plugged in, crumbs spilled on the counter, a faint smell of burnt toast lingering in the air. In the living room, a half-read novel lay open face down on the sofa, next to a pair of reading glasses, as if Emily had just paused mid-sentence. On the coffee table, a family board game, Monopoly, was set up mid-game with pieces scattered and play money neatly stacked. It looked as if the Millers had simply stepped out for a moment, perhaps to retrieve something from the car, or to check the mail, or maybe just to enjoy the crisp morning air. But they never came back. In Jessica's room, her bed was unmade, a stuffed teddy bear tucked under the covers as if she'd just gotten up. Her backpack was by the door, pristine, ready for school. On her desk, a half-finished drawing of a whimsical forest scene sat beside an open box of crayons. A single red crayon rolled onto the floor. The most chilling detail, perhaps, was in the kitchen. Emily's purse was on the counter, car keys still inside. Michael's wallet was on his bedside table, along with his phone and watch neatly placed. Their car was in the driveway. They hadn't left in a hurry. They hadn't taken anything important with them. Not their phones, not their money, not their identification, not even a change of clothes. It was as if they had simply evaporated in the middle of a perfectly ordinary morning routine. The police treated it as a missing persons case, of course. They scoured the house, the yard, the entire neighborhood. They brought in canine units, but the dogs found no scent trail leaving the property. Only a confusing, swirling mix of the family's lingering presence within the house itself. They interviewed every neighbor, every friend, every colleague, every distant relative. No one had seen anything suspicious. No strange cars, no arguments, no threats. Michael and Emily were well liked, without known enemies or significant debts. There was no indication of domestic dispute, no signs of a struggle, no broken items, no overturned furniture. The house was pristine, eerily untouched, except for the lingering presence of a family that was no longer there. The initial investigation was exhaustive, unprecedented for Willow Creek, but ultimately fruitless. Every lead turned into a dead end. Every theory crumbled under scrutiny. Kidnapping? Without a ransom demand, without a struggle, without any trace of a perpetrator, it seemed impossible. Voluntary disappearance? Why leave everything behind? Every tie to a comfortable, happy life without a single clue, a single note, a single goodbye. It defied logic. It defied reason. It defied every pattern known to law enforcement. The perplexing normality of the scene, combined with the absolute absence of the family, created a paradox that stumped even the most seasoned detectives. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the hope of finding the Millers alive dwindled into a cold, hard ache that settled over Willow Creek. The house on Elm Street became a monument to the unknown, a silent sentinel to a mystery that refused to yield its secrets. It became the house where a family had simply ceased to be. And the question that echoed through Willow Creek, a question that still whispers in the wind through those empty windows, was not just what happened to the Millers, but how can three people, a whole family, just vanish into thin air? This is the story of that house. This is the story of the Miller family. And this is the story of the desperate search for answers, a search that would lead to places far stranger and more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Because the truth, if it ever surfaces, might reveal something far more disturbing than a simple disappearance. It might reveal what happens when a family doesn't just leave, but is meticulously, terrifyingly erased. And the clues, the hidden connections, the whispers from the past, were all waiting patiently, in that perfectly ordinary robin's egg blue house on Elm Street, for someone to finally listen. Someone did listen. Or rather, someone moved in. Michael and Sarah, a young couple from out of state, had bought the house for a steal. The real estate agent had mumbled something about the previous owners having relocated suddenly, a phrase that, in retrospect, carried a chilling undertone they'd completely missed. To them, it was just an old house with good bones, a large yard, and an unbelievably low price. They were optimists, dreamers even, eager to put down roots and start their own story within its robin's egg blue walls. They saw potential, not echoes. Their first few weeks were a blur of moving boxes, paint swatches, and the comforting chaos of making a house a home. Sarah, with her keen eye for detail and a love for vintage charm, was determined to uncover every hidden gem the old place might offer. Michael, ever the pragmatist, was more focused on fixing leaky faucets and rewiring outdated outlets. The house, built in the late 1960s, had a solid, if slightly dated, feel. There was a faint, almost imperceptible scent of old paper and something else, something metallic and earthy that Sarah attributed to years of being closed up. One sunny afternoon, while Michael was wrestling with a stubborn kitchen cabinet, Sarah decided to tackle the master bedroom closet. It was surprisingly spacious, with a deep set of built-in shelves. As she ran her hand along the back wall, dusting away decades of accumulated grime, her fingers snagged on something. Not a loose nail, but a subtle indentation, a slight give in the otherwise solid drywall. It was barely noticeable, hidden behind a stack of forgotten old blankets and a moth-eaten suit jacket. Curiosity piqued, she called out to Michael, "Hey honey, can you come here for a second?" Her voice was light, still imbued with the excitement of discovery. Michael, grumbling about a stripped screw, eventually joined her. "What's up? Found a secret passage to Narnia?" he joked, still wiping grease from his hands. Sarah pointed to the spot. "No, but look. This wall, it feels different here." He pressed against it, then frowned. "Huh, you're right. It's almost like there's a panel." He fetched a small utility knife from his toolbox and carefully began to trace the outline of what felt like a hidden seam. With a gentle pry, a section of the drywall, about 2 feet by 3 feet, swung inward with a soft groan, revealing not a passage but a narrow, dark recess. It was less a secret room and more a deep cubbyhole. Inside, nestled amongst cobwebs and dust motes dancing in the sliver of light, was a single leather-bound notebook. It looked old, its cover worn smooth in places, with a faint, almost illegible inscription pressed into the leather. Michael reached in, his fingers brushing against the cool, dry surface of the book. As he pulled it out, a small, faded photograph slipped from between its pages, fluttering to the floor. Sarah picked it up. It was a picture of a family, a smiling man with kind eyes, a beautiful woman with a warm smile, and a young girl, no older than 10 or 11, with bright, curious eyes and a missing front tooth, grinning widely. They looked happy, normal. "Who do you think they are?" Sarah asked, a flicker of unease starting to temper her initial excitement. Michael opened the notebook. The first few pages were blank, but then neat, looping handwriting began. "Looks like a journal," he murmured, scanning the first entry. "April 12, teach my new diary. Mom says I have to write in it every day to practice my handwriting. Boring." He looked up at Sarah. "It's a kid's diary. Emily. Emily Miller." The name clicked. Emily, the daughter of the family who had vanished. The name that local gossip still whispered about. They sat on the dusty closet floor, the sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating the swirling dust, and the profound silence that had suddenly descended around them. Michael began to read aloud, his voice low, the words of a child from the past filling their new home. Emily's early entries were exactly as you'd expect from a girl her age. Complaints about homework, excitement over a new pet hamster named Whiskers, detailed accounts of schoolyard dramas, and her hopes for summer vacation. There were drawings too, crude but charming stick figures. A house with a smoking chimney, a bright yellow sun. It painted a picture of a perfectly ordinary, happy childhood. Then slowly, subtly, the tone began to shift. June 3 RD *. Dad's been spending a lot of time in the basement. He says it's his special project. Mom looks worried sometimes when he talks about it. He bought a lot of strange equipment. Big boxes arrived. He says it's going to change everything. June 15 *. Mom and Dad had a fight last night. I heard them through the door. Mom was crying. She said Dad was obsessed, and that he was losing himself. Dad just kept saying it was for our future, Jessica. I don't understand. What future? July 1 *. Whiskers ran away, I think. Or maybe Dad let him out. He said Whiskers was making too much noise and interfering with the frequencies. I miss him. Dad seems different. He doesn't smile as much and his eyes look tired. Or maybe excited. It's hard to tell. July 10 *. Dad put up new locks on the basement door. And he put a camera outside it. He says it's for security, but Mom just shakes her head. He spends all night down there now. Sometimes I hear strange humming noises coming up through the floorboards. Like a giant bee. July 22 ND *. Mom says we can't talk about Dad's project with anyone. Not even Aunt Carol. She says it's a secret, a very important secret. I don't like secrets. They make my tummy feel funny. August 5 *. I saw Dad looking at a map today. Not a regular map. It had strange symbols on it. and a lot of numbers. He saw me looking and quickly folded it away. He looked angry. I think he's mad I saw it. He never gets mad at me. August 18 *. The humming has gotten louder. Sometimes it makes the glasses in the kitchen cabinet rattle. Mom says it's just the old house, but I know it's not. It's coming from the basement. I tried to ask Dad what it was, but he just patted my head and told me to go play outside. He seems distant, like he's not really here. August 25 *. I heard Mom crying again. She was on the phone whispering. She said, "He's gone too far, Carol. I don't know what to do." Then she saw me and hung up. She pretended everything was fine, but her eyes were red. I think she's scared of Dad now, and I don't know why. Michael stopped reading, his voice a little hoarse. Sarah was gripping the photo of the smiling family so tightly her knuckles were white. The innocence of the early entries had given way to a palpable sense of dread, slowly tightening its grip with each passing sentence. "What do you think he was doing down there?" Sarah whispered, her gaze fixed on the photo. "A special project? Frequencies? Strange humming?" Michael shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "I have no idea, but it sounds like something experimental, dangerous even." He looked around the master bedroom, suddenly seeing the robin's egg blue walls not as a canvas for their future, but as a silent witness to a past horror. And the fact that he put locks and a camera, he was hiding something. He flipped a few more pages. Emily's handwriting became more erratic, rushed, as if she was writing in haste or fear. September 1 *. Dad says the convergence is almost ready. He's so excited. He talks in riddles now. Mom doesn't even try to understand anymore. She just watches him with those sad eyes. I heard him say something about the other side. What other side? September 5 *. I saw them. The shadows. In my room. Just for a second. They weren't like regular shadows. They were deeper. And they moved. When I told Mom, she just held me tight and said it was a dream. But it wasn't a dream. September 8 *. The house feels cold now. Even when the sun is out. And sometimes I hear whispers. Not words, just whispers. Like leaves rustling, but inside my head. Dad says it's the resonance. He says it means it's working. September 10 *. Mom tried to leave today. She packed a small bag. Dad stopped her. He didn't yell. He just stood in the doorway and his eyes, they were empty. He said, "We're a family, Jessica. We stay together. For the project." She cried. I cried too. We're trapped. September 12 *. It's today. Dad said it's time. The final calibration. Mom just sits in the living room staring at nothing. She looks like a ghost already. I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen. The humming is deafening. My head hurts. I hear voices now. So many voices. They're telling me to. The entry ended abruptly. The page was torn, as if ripped away in a struggle or perhaps, in the frantic scramble of a child trying to write down her last, terrifying thoughts. The next page was stained, a dark, rusty brown blotch marring the pristine white paper. Not quite blood, but something disturbingly organic. Silence descended again, heavy and suffocating. Michael and Sarah stared at the incomplete, chilling words, at the unsettling stain. The smiling family in the photograph now seemed to mock them, their happiness a cruel illusion. They vanished shortly after September 12th, didn't they? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on the journal. The official report said September 14th was the last confirmed sighting of David Miller. Jessica and Emily were never seen after the 12th. His eyes widened. The same day as this last entry. The perfectly ordinary, Robin's Egg Blue house on Elm Street no longer felt ordinary. It felt like a tomb, a silent, gaping maw that had swallowed a family whole. And now Michael and Sarah, through a child's desperate plea from the past, had stumbled upon the horrifying truth of their disappearance. They weren't just gone, they were taken. And whatever had taken them, whatever David Miller had unleashed in his basement, might still be waiting. The basement. The place where it all began. The basement. The place where it all began. Even from the top of the creaking stairs, a chill permeated the air, colder than any draft. It wasn't just the dampness of an old forgotten space. It was a profound, unnatural cold that seemed to seep into the bones. The scent was complex, a metallic tang mingling with the musty odor of decay, and something else, something sharp and acrid, like ozone after a lightning strike. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to slam the door shut and pretend this subterranean maw didn't exist, but the truth lay buried down there, waiting. The descent was slow, each step on the rickety wooden stairs echoing in the oppressive silence. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own, making the familiar shapes of stacked boxes and forgotten furniture appear monstrous. But it wasn't the dust or the cobwebs that commanded attention. It was the floor. Patches of the concrete were discolored, a dark, almost greasy stain spreading outwards from what looked like a central point. It wasn't blood. Not precisely, but something organic, something that had soaked deep into the porous surface and refused to fade. And around this central stain, etched directly into the concrete, were intricate geometric patterns. Not symbols of any known language or religion, but precise, almost scientific diagrams, radiating outwards like a spiderweb. They were alien, unsettling, and meticulously drawn. This wasn't a casual project. This was an obsession. A heavy wooden workbench dominated one corner, littered not with tools for home repairs, but with an array of strange equipment. Copper wires snaked across the surface, connecting bizarre glass tubes and crude electrical components to a series of archaic-looking dials and gauges. A rusted metal cage, too small for an animal, lay overturned nearby, its bars bent as if by immense force. And then, at the very center of the workbench, partially obscured by a stack of yellowed blueprints covered in frantic handwritten notes, lay a journal. Its leather cover was cracked and peeling, and its pages, when opened, were filled with David Miller's increasingly erratic script. The journal wasn't just a diary. It was a confession, a chronicle of a man's descent into a terrifying realm of his own making. David Miller, it revealed, was not merely a reclusive academic. He was a self-taught theoretical physicist, driven by a radical, almost heretical belief. He theorized that reality itself was a construct of resonant frequencies, and that by manipulating these frequencies, one could thin the veil between what was manifest and what remained unseen. He called it liminal resonance theory. His initial experiments, detailed in the early pages, were innocuous enough. Attempts to create subtle auditory hallucinations or manipulate electromagnetic fields. But his ambition grew, fueled by a singular, consuming grief, the loss of his wife, Sarah, years prior. He didn't just want to understand, he wanted to reverse. He wanted to find a frequency that could draw the essence of what was lost back into existence, to make the unseen seen again. The entries grew darker, more obsessive. He spoke of thinning the membrane, of a persistent hum just beyond hearing, and of shadows that weren't shadows. He detailed the construction of the apparatus on the workbench, a resonance emitter designed to broadcast specific frequencies into a localized field, the geometric patterns on the floor acting as a focal array. He believed he was on the verge of a breakthrough, that he could touch the very fabric of existence. Then came the shift. The entries became less scientific, more desperate. He started to question his own sanity, even as his conviction deepened. "It responds," he scrawled in a shaky hand, "not as I anticipated. Not a return, but an arrival." He wrote of a cold that wasn't just temperature, but an absence of warmth, of life. He described a presence, initially faint, like a whisper in the periphery of his mind, then growing stronger, more insistent. It wasn't Sarah. It was something else entirely. Something ancient, something predatory. He had opened a door, not to a realm of comforting spirits, but to a void. And from that void, something had answered. David's journal entries from this period were a terrifying record of his mounting horror. He realized his liminal resonance theory had a fatal flaw. The frequencies didn't just pull, they attracted. And what he had attracted was not a passive echo, but an active, intelligent entity. He dubbed it the harvester. It didn't just exist in the liminal space, it fed on it and on what crossed over. It fed on existence itself. The discoloration on the concrete floor, he explained, was not blood, but something far more insidious. It was the residue of the harvester's presence, a faint, almost invisible energy signature that accompanied its manifestations. It didn't leave physical traces because it didn't interact with the physical world in the way humans understood. It consumed the essence of being. Memories, emotions, identity, the very fabric of a person's existence. These were its sustenance. When it took someone, it didn't just kill them. It erased them. They didn't die. They simply ceased to have ever been. Their memories faded from the minds of others. Their belongings became meaningless objects. Their presence in the world dissolved. This was how the Miller family had vanished. Not kidnapped, not murdered, but harvested. David's subsequent entries detailed his desperate attempts to understand and, more importantly, to contain the harvester. He wrote of the entity's ability to subtly manipulate perceptions, to make itself unseen, unheard, slowly eroding the reality around its victims until they were ripe for consumption. He described how it would target one family member at a time, weakening their connections to others, making them feel isolated, forgotten, before finally utterly consuming them. His wife, Emily, his daughter, Jessica, his son, Michael. Each name appeared in his journal, scrawled with increasing anguish, followed by chilling observations of their gradual disappearance from his own memory, their faces blurring, their voices fading. He was witnessing his own family being erased piece by agonizing piece, and he was powerless to stop it. He, the one who had opened the door, was now watching everything he loved become its prey. The final entries were a frantic, barely coherent warning. He had tried to reverse the frequency, to close the door, but the harvester had adapted. It had grown stronger, more anchored to this plane, its influence spreading beyond the basement. He realized his efforts were futile. The entity was not just a scientific anomaly. It was a hungry, sentient force that had found a new hunting ground. His last words in the journal were chilling in their stark resignation. It's not just in the basement anymore. It's in the walls. It's in the air. It's in me. And soon there will be nothing left to remember. Then a final, almost illegible scribble. A single word that resonated with unimaginable terror. Run. The journal ended there. The story of David Miller and his family wasn't just one of disappearance. It was a horror story of cosmic proportions. He hadn't just lost his family. He had unleashed an entity that devoured not just lives, but the very memory of those lives. And the most horrifying realization? The basement, with its strange markings and deactivated resonance emitter, wasn't just the place where the entity was summoned. It was the nexus. It was the conduit. And while the equipment was silent, the lingering chill, the oppressive silence, the faint, acrid scent of ozone, all served as a terrifying reminder. The harvester hadn't left. It was still here, dormant perhaps, but aware, waiting. And anyone who stumbled upon David Miller's terrible truth, anyone who dared to delve into his forgotten basement, was now within its reach. The act of learning about it might just be the very thing that drew its attention once more. The act of learning about it might just be the very thing that drew its attention once more. And for Emily Hayes, a quiet woman with an insatiable curiosity for the forgotten corners of her town's history, that attention was about to become terrifyingly real. Emily, a freelance researcher with a penchant for the unsolved, had stumbled upon the Miller case purely by accident. While sifting through digitized archives for a piece on local architectural oddities, a faded newspaper clipping from 1987 had caught her eye. Prominent Miller family vanishes without a trace. The headline, stark and unsettling, had burrowed into her mind. There were no bodies, no ransom notes, no signs of forced entry. Just an empty house and a gaping void where a family of 4 had once been. It was the kind of mystery that gnawed at you, begging for answers. Her small apartment, usually a sanctuary of focused research, began to feel different. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A book, one she was certain she'd left neatly stacked, would be found on the floor. Her coffee mug, placed firmly on a coaster, would be inches from its original spot. Emily, a meticulous person by nature, chalked it up to fatigue, to her own absent-mindedness, to the quirks of an old building settling. But the occurrences grew more frequent, more specific. One evening, deep into her investigation, her computer screen flickered violently, not once but several times as she typed David Miller basement. The screen didn't just flicker. It seemed to glitch, displaying a momentary jumble of corrupted pixels before returning to normal. She dismissed it as an old laptop acting up, but a shiver traced its way down her spine. Felt too coincidental. Emily delved deeper into David Miller. Property records revealed an unusual detail. The Miller house, while outwardly unremarkable, had an extensively reinforced, soundproofed basement. Why would a family man, a seemingly ordinary accountant, invest in such a structure? It screamed of a need for absolute containment, or absolute secrecy? The thought sent a cold tendril of unease through her. She found whispers in archived local forums, long-dead digital conversations from decades past. People remembered David Miller as a quiet, almost withdrawn man, but not overtly strange. Yet, there were fleeting mentions of his increasing reclusiveness in the months before the disappearance, his preoccupation with projects in his basement, and vague rumors of him acquiring unusual industrial-grade chemicals from out-of-state suppliers. One forum user, posting under an anonymous handle, had written, "Heard some strange things coming from that place at night. Not human." The post was quickly dismissed by others as neighborhood gossip, but Emily saved it. The subtle occurrences in her apartment escalated. The faint whisper she'd attributed to the wind or her imagination began to sound more distinct, a low guttural hum that seemed to vibrate not from outside, but from inside her own head when she was intensely focused on the Miller case. It was never intelligible, just a resonant thrum that made her teeth ache and her skin prickle. Objects began to move while she was in the room, her back momentarily turned. A framed photograph of her and her sister, sitting squarely on her desk, would be found face down. A small heavy paperweight would slide an inch or two across the polished wood, leaving a faint trail. Emily started to feel a distinct, cold presence behind her, a weight in the air that never quite materialized, but always made her spin around, heart pounding, to an empty room. Sleep became a fractured landscape of paranoia. Every creak of the building, every distant siren seemed amplified, imbued with a sinister intent. She started checking her apartment door locks multiple times before bed, the metallic clicks echoing unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. She was alone, yet she felt profoundly, terrifyingly watched. Her research led her to the local historical society, where she uncovered a digitized collection of personal letters from the late 1980s. Tucked away in a folder labeled Neighborhood Correspondence Elm Street, she found a series of letters from a Mrs. Eleanor Vance, a neighbor of the Millers, written to her sister. Mrs. Vance, a meticulous elderly woman, had a keen eye for local happenings. In one letter, dated just a week before the Miller family vanished, Mrs. Vance expressed her growing unease with David Miller. "He's changed, Martha," she wrote, her elegant cursive slightly shaky. "Always in that basement of his. And the noises. My dear, I heard a terrible wailing from his basement last Tuesday night, like nothing human I've ever heard. It went on for hours. Sent shivers down my spine. And he's been digging, Martha, down by the old well site at the back of his property. Obsessed with that forgotten corner. I worry about that poor Jessica and the children." Emily's blood ran cold. The reinforced basement. The inhuman wailing. David's strange behavior. The digging near an old well site. A detail that seemed to echo some forgotten, darker history. It wasn't just a disappearance. It was an event. A terrifying culmination of whatever David Miller had been doing, whatever he had been involved with. And whatever it was, it hadn't stayed contained. It hadn't stayed in the past. As Emily reread Mrs. Vance's chilling words, the low hum in her head intensified, vibrating through her skull with a sickening pressure. The air in her small office grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. Her computer screen, moments ago displaying the archaic script of Mrs. Vance, flickered wildly, the text distorting into an illegible scramble of pixels before going utterly, irrevocably black. Then from the hallway just beyond her closed office door, a single distinct thump echoed. Not from outside her apartment, not from a neighbor, but from inside. It was heavy, deliberate, and undeniably close. Emily froze, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Her breath hitched in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was no longer just researching a story. She was in it. And whatever had claimed the Miller family, whatever David Miller had awakened, was now undeniably, terrifyingly, here. And it knew her name. Her name wasn't spoken aloud, not in the traditional sense. It was a thought, a chilling, intimate whisper that resonated directly inside her skull. Yet it wasn't her own thought. It was foreign, ancient, and utterly malevolent, echoing from the very marrow of her bones, reverberating through the dusty silence of the Miller house. Emily stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth, a choked gasp escaping her lips. Her heart, already a frantic drumbeat against her ribs, now hammered with a desperate, primal rhythm, threatening to burst from her chest. Every nerve ending screamed, her vision blurring at the edges as she struggled to comprehend what had just happened. It knew her name. How? She hadn't spoken it since she arrived. Had it been listening? Had it been waiting? A cold sweat slicked her skin, turning her clothes clammy. This wasn't a prank, not a hallucination, and certainly not a trick of the light. This was real. Whatever darkness had enveloped the Millers, whatever David Miller had so recklessly probed, was now awake, alert, and focused entirely on her. She was no longer a detached observer, a journalist digging for a story. She was the next chapter, the next victim, undeniably, terrifyingly here. And it knew her name. Panic, raw and unreasoning, seized her. Get out. Now. Her legs, heavy with sudden dread, somehow found the strength to move. She spun, fumbling for her phone, her fingers clumsy as she tried to unlock the screen. She needed help, a voice, any connection to the sane world outside these walls. Michael. She needed Michael. She pressed his contact, her thumb shaking, and brought the phone to her ear. Nothing. A flat, dead silence. No dial tone, no ringing. Just the faint, almost imperceptible hiss of static. She tried again, moving towards the living room window, desperate for a sliver of signal. Still nothing. The house seemed to swallow the cellular waves, isolating her completely. A horrifying realization dawned. She was utterly alone, trapped. She bolted for the front door, her breath ragged, her hand clamped around the doorknob, twisting it frantically. It wouldn't turn. It was locked. She remembered locking it when she came in, a habit, a subconscious need for security. But now it felt different. Stuck. Immovable. She rattled it, pulled harder, her shoulder bumping against the solid wood. The door held fast, as if it had become an organic part of the house itself, unyielding. No, she whispered, her voice a thin, reedy sound in the oppressive silence. She tried the back door, racing through the kitchen, nearly tripping over a loose rug. The back door, too, was locked, bolted from the inside. A heavy deadbolt she hadn't noticed before. She tugged, pushed, pounded on the wood, but it was useless. The windows. She looked around, her eyes darting from one pane to another. They were old, many painted shut, others covered by thick, dust-laden drapes. Even if she could pry one open, the thought of breaking glass, of making such a loud noise in this terrifying silence, made her hesitate. What would that sound attract? The air in the house grew perceptibly colder, a chill seeping into her bones that had nothing to do with the external temperature. Shadows seemed to deepen in the corners, clinging to the furniture, transforming familiar shapes into grotesque, lurking figures. A low, almost inaudible hum began to vibrate through the floorboards, a guttural thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the house. It wasn't a sound she could pinpoint, but a sensation, a deep resonance that vibrated in her chest, making her teeth ache. She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to force clarity into her panicked mind. This wasn't just a house. It was a cage. And something was watching her, something that had just called her by name. What had David Miller written in his notes? The resonance. The shift. He hadn't just awakened something, he had unleashed it. Or perhaps, he had merely opened a door to something that had always been here, dormant, waiting for a specific kind of energy, a specific kind of fear to feed upon. A desperate, reckless thought sparked through her terror. If she was trapped, if this thing knew her name, then perhaps the only way out was through. She needed answers, more answers than she had. She needed to understand what David Miller had truly stumbled upon. And her gut, that stubborn journalistic instinct that had brought her to this cursed place, screamed at her to return to the study, to the hidden compartment, to those strange, unsettling symbols. With a profound sense of foreboding, Emily forced her trembling legs to move. Each step felt heavy, as if the floorboards themselves resisted her. The humming intensified as she approached the study, a low thrum that seemed to vibrate directly inside her ears. The cold was biting now, raising gooseflesh on her arms. The air felt thick, heavy with an unseen presence, a palpable weight pressing down on her. It felt like walking into a freezer, but a freezer that was alive, breathing around her. She reached the study, her eyes immediately drawn to the section of the wall where the hidden panel lay. The shadows seemed particularly dense there, swirling like dark mist. With hands that shook so violently she nearly dropped her phone, she located the nearly invisible seam. She pressed the spot, and with a soft click, the panel swung inward. The space behind it was dark, deeper than she remembered. She retrieved her phone, fumbling to turn on its flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the intricate, disturbing symbols etched onto the back wall of the compartment. They were still there, still unsettling, but now with the knowledge that something was actively here, they felt menacing. Her gaze swept over them, then lingered. She noticed something she had completely overlooked before. Something so subtle it was almost invisible. A faint line, a hairline crack or seam, running vertically down the center of the compartment's back wall, directly behind the symbols. It was barely discernible, cleverly disguised. Was it another panel? Her heart leaped into her throat. David Miller, for all his eccentricities, had been thorough. He'd hidden things within things. With renewed, albeit terrified, determination, Emily probed the seam with her fingernail. It gave slightly. She pushed harder, feeling a tiny give. She needed something thin, something sturdy. Her eyes landed on a forgotten letter opener on David's desk, an old brass one with a dull blade. She snatched it, her fingers clumsy, and returned to the compartment. Carefully, meticulously, she inserted the tip of the letter opener into the seam. She wiggled it, applying gentle pressure, listening intently. A faint click echoed from within the wall, softer than the first. Then, with a slow, agonizing groan of old wood, a second smaller panel, perhaps only 8 inches by 8 inches, swung inward. Emily held her breath, shining her phone's light into the newly revealed space. It was shallow, barely deep enough for a small object, and there, nestled within, on a bed of what looked like faded velvet, lay a small tarnished silver locket. It was ornate, intricately engraved with swirling patterns and what looked like tiny, barely visible floral motifs. It looked incredibly old, perhaps from a century ago or even more. Her fingers trembling, Emily reached in and carefully extracted the locket. It felt cold to the touch, heavy for its size. She examined it, her gaze fixed on the delicate clasp. With a slow, deliberate movement, she unfastened it. The locket sprang open. Inside, on one side, was a miniature portrait. It depicted a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with delicate features, dark hair pulled back in a style from a bygone era, and large, luminous eyes. She possessed a striking beauty, but her gaze held a profound, almost unbearable sadness, a deep melancholy that seemed to reach out across the decades. On the other side of the locket, folded several times into a minuscule square, was a piece of parchment. It was brittle, yellowed with age, so thin it looked like it might disintegrate if she wasn't careful. Her heart pounding, Emily carefully extracted the tiny parchment with the tip of the letter opener. She unfolded it, her movements slow and precise, fearing it would crumble to dust. The writing was faint, in a delicate, looping cursive script that was difficult to decipher at first glance. She brought it closer to her phone's light, squinting. As she slowly pieced together the faded words, a wave of profound dread washed over her, colder and more terrifying than anything she had felt so far. It wasn't a letter. It was a warning. "They chose this place," she read, her voice a barely audible whisper. "They feed on fear. Do not let them know your name. Do not let them hear your thoughts." Her blood ran cold. Asterisk, do not let them know your name. Do not let them hear your thoughts. Asterisk, the words echoed the chilling whisper she had just experienced, the one that had called her by name. This wasn't just a general warning. It was specific, precise, and horrifyingly relevant to her current situation. Her gaze dropped to the very bottom of the parchment, where another name was written, smaller, almost an afterthought. Eleanor Vance. 1898. Eleanor Vance. Not Miller. This house, this terror was not confined to the recent past. It stretched back, far back, a dark lineage of victims. The Millers weren't the first family to vanish here. They were just the latest. And Eleanor Vance from 1898 had known. She had left a warning. A new, terrifying realization dawned on her. It knew her name because it had heard her thoughts. It wasn't just listening to whispers in the air. It was inside her head, a parasitic presence feeding on her very consciousness. Suddenly, a loud, jarring crash erupted from upstairs, directly above her. It sounded like something heavy falling, shattering glass or splintering wood. The sound tore through the oppressive silence, making Emily scream, a raw, involuntary cry of sheer terror. The locket and the ancient parchment flew from her grasp, clattering onto the dusty floor. She stumbled backward, her eyes wide, fixed on the study doorway, her breath catching in her throat. The humming sound intensified, vibrating through the floorboards, through her very bones, a deep, resonant growl that filled the entire house. The air crackled with static electricity, prickling her skin, making the hairs on her arms stand on end. And then a new whisper, clearer this time, not just her name but a question, laced with something ancient and hungry, a voice that seemed to speak from the very fabric of the house itself. "What have you found, Emily?" The whisper was a physical blow, a cold wave washing over Emily, making every nerve-ending scream. Her breath hitched, caught in her throat, a tiny terrified gasp escaping her lips. It wasn't just a sound. It was a presence, a malevolent awareness that had been lurking, patiently waiting, and now it had shown itself. Her mind, usually so sharp and analytical, scrambled for an explanation, a rational loophole. The wind? The old house settling? An echo? But the words, "What have you found, Emily?" were too clear, too deliberate, too personal. She stood frozen, her eyes wide, darting around the master bedroom. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen pressure, pressing in on her from all sides. The flickering light from her phone seemed to dim, casting longer, more grotesque shadows that danced in the corners of her vision. The silence that followed the whisper was worse than the whisper itself. A profound, expectant quiet, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for her answer. "Hello," she managed, her voice a thin, reedy whisper that barely left her lips. It was a foolish question, she knew. If it was a person, why whisper? If it wasn't, what good would a greeting do? But the human instinct to acknowledge the unknown, to give it a name, was overwhelming. No answer. Only the oppressive quiet. She clutched her phone, its cold metal a small comfort in her trembling hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing in her ears. Every creak of the old house, every shift in the floorboards, now sounded like a deliberate step, a slow, predatory approach. She wanted to run, to bolt from the room, from the house, to leave the mystery unsolved and never look back. But something held her rooted, a morbid fascination, a terrifying need to understand what this entity was, and what it wanted, and more importantly, what it knew about the Miller family. "What have you found, Emily?" The question echoed in her mind, not audibly now, but as a chilling thought, projected directly into her consciousness. It knew. It knew she was looking for something. It knew she was close. She forced herself to move, one trembling foot after the other, backing away from the spot where she'd heard the voice, towards the door. But as she reached the threshold, a low guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that seemed to emanate from deep within the house's foundations. It wasn't animalistic, not quite. It was something older, a sound of ancient disapproval, a warning. She froze again, her hand hovering over the doorknob. The growl intensified for a moment, then faded, leaving behind a faint, lingering hum in the air, like a distant dying chord. This wasn't a trick of the mind. This was real. Her gaze fell upon the large, ornate built-in wardrobe that dominated one wall of the master bedroom. It was dark, made of a heavy aged wood, with intricate carvings that depicted swirling vines and strange, almost grotesque faces peering out from the foliage. It looked like it had been there since the house was first built, a permanent fixture. As she stared at it, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer seemed to play across its surface, like heat haze distorting the air. Could the voice have come from inside there? Was there some hidden passage, some secret room? The question, "What have you found?" still burned in her mind. What had she found? She had found nothing yet, not truly. But the entity seemed to think otherwise. Or perhaps it was anticipating what she would find. A strange, defiant resolve began to mingle with her fear. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was an intruder, and this entity was challenging her. She wouldn't back down. Not yet. Not when she was so close to understanding. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Emily turned away from the door and slowly, cautiously, approached the massive wardrobe. The air around it felt colder, heavier, as if all the darkness in the room congregated there. She ran her hand along the cool, smooth wood, feeling the raised grooves of the carvings. The grotesque faces seemed to watch her, their eyes carved deep, hollow sockets that appeared to follow her movements. She examined every panel, every joint, every inch of the intricate woodwork. There were no obvious seams, no visible handles for a hidden door. It was a solid, unyielding piece. But the feeling, the intuition, was overwhelming. This wardrobe wasn't just storage. It was a barrier. Her fingers traced the swirling vines, feeling for any loose sections, any faint give in the wood. Her gaze scanned the floor, the ceiling, looking for any telltale signs of a mechanism. Nothing. It was expertly crafted. Then, as her fingers brushed against one of the carved faces, a small, almost imperceptible click echoed in the heavy silence. She pulled her hand back as if burned. Had she imagined it? No, it was distinct. She pressed on the face again, a small gnarled depiction of a man with wide, shocked eyes. Nothing. She tried another, and another. Frustration began to bubble up, mixing with her terror. She paused, taking another breath, trying to slow her racing heart. She remembered Michael's advice about old houses, about looking for patterns, for things that seemed out of place even subtly. She looked at the carvings again, not as individual elements but as a whole. The vines, the leaves, the faces. There were 12 faces in total, 6 on each door of the double wardrobe. They were all slightly different, yet all shared that same look of primal fear. 12. A number often associated with cycles, with time, or perhaps with something else entirely. She looked at the faces more closely. One of them, the one she had pressed, had slightly deeper set eyes than the others. It was almost imperceptible, hidden within the shadow of the carving. She pressed it again, harder this time, focusing her weight. Another click. This time it was accompanied by a soft groan, the sound of ancient wood shifting. A thin line appeared along the side of the wardrobe, a hairline crack that widened slightly, revealing a sliver of darkness behind it. Emily gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. It was real. There was a hidden compartment. With trembling fingers, she pushed gently on the edge of the newly revealed crack. The section of the wardrobe, about a foot wide and extending from floor to ceiling, swung inward with a faint creak, revealing a narrow, dark alcove. A wave of cold, stagnant air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of dust, old paper, and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like dried blood mixed with forgotten spices. She recoiled slightly, her stomach churning. She aimed her phone's flashlight into the darkness. The alcove was small, barely wide enough for a person to stand inside, and surprisingly deep. It wasn't a secret room but a storage space. And inside, arranged neatly on a single dusty shelf, were several items. The first thing that caught her eye was a stack of old yellowed scientific journals. Not just any journals, but specifically botany journals dating back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They were bound in dark leather, their titles faded but still legible, discussing rare plant species, ancient cultivation methods, and obscure herbal remedies. This was unexpected. Mr. Miller was a history professor, not a botanist. Beneath the journals was a small wooden box, intricately carved with the same swirling vine patterns as the wardrobe itself. As she reached for it, her hand brushed against something else, tucked away in the back of the shelf. It was a small tarnished silver locket, suspended from a thin, delicate chain. It looked like something a young girl might wear. Her heart ached with a sudden, sharp pang of sympathy for Sarah Miller, the missing daughter. Was this hers? She carefully picked up the locket. It was cold to the touch. She tried to open it, but it was sealed shut, as if the clasp had corroded over time. Turning it over, she saw a faint engraving on the back. A single delicate rose, encircled by the initials Sarah Miller. This was definitely hers. Why would it be hidden here? A shiver ran down her spine. This wasn't just a hiding place. It felt like a time capsule of secrets. She put the locket down gently and picked up the wooden box. It was surprisingly heavy. The carvings on it were unsettling, deeper and more pronounced than those on the wardrobe, with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the phone's beam. There was no obvious clasp. She ran her fingers over the carvings, looking for a hidden mechanism. Just like with the wardrobe, her thumb found a small, almost invisible indentation on one of the carved leaves. She pressed it. A soft click, and the lid of the box sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single peculiar item. It was a small, dried, gnarled root, twisted into a grotesque humanoid shape. It looked ancient, brittle, and somehow malevolent. Its surface was dark, almost black, and gave off that same faint metallic sweet scent she had noticed earlier. It wasn't a root from any plant she recognized from her brief glance at the botany journals. It looked like something that had been pulled from the deepest, darkest earth, something that had endured unimaginable time. And woven intricately around it, almost like a cage, were thin, dried strands of human hair. Dark brown, almost black. Sarah Miller's hair was blonde. Mrs. Miller's hair was light brown. Mr. Miller's was gray. Whose hair was this? Emily stared at the horrifying artifact, her breath catching in her throat. Her mind raced, trying to process this grotesque discovery. The botany journals, the locket, the strange humanoid root entwined with human hair. This wasn't just a family vanishing act anymore. This was something far, far darker. Something ritualistic. Something ancient. The whispered question from earlier, "What have you found, Emily?" echoed in her mind again, but this time it was accompanied by a new, chilling realization. The entity hadn't been asking what she had found in the general sense. It had been asking specifically about this. This was what it wanted her to find. This was the key. A cold dread seeped into her bones, colder than the air from the alcove, colder than the locket. She felt an overwhelming sense of violation, a certainty that she had stumbled upon something profoundly evil, something that had consumed the Miller family and was now patiently waiting for its next victim. The light from her phone, which had seemed so dim earlier, now felt like a beacon, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. She instinctively reached for the wooden box, intending to close it, to hide the monstrous root from view, to deny its existence. But as her fingers brushed the edge of the box, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the root itself. A tiny, almost silent hum, like a low-frequency vibration, emanated from it, resonating deep within her chest. It was alive, or at least it held a terrifying semblance of life. And then from the darkest corner of the master bedroom, the corner she had instinctively avoided, a new sound emerged. A low, drawn-out sigh like the wind whistling through a tomb, followed by a faint rustling sound, as if something unseen was slowly, deliberately, unfurling itself in the shadows. Emily's blood ran cold. She had found it, and now it had found her. The air in the hidden space constricted around Emily, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and ancient, like old blood mingled with forgotten dust. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, suffocating silence that followed the unsettling sound. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to scramble back through the crawl space and never look back. But a morbid curiosity, a storyteller's desperate need to uncover the truth, rooted her to the spot, her phone still clutched in her trembling hand, its flashlight beam slicing through the oppressive darkness. She forced herself to breathe shallow, ragged gasps that did little to calm the frantic thrumming in her ears. Slowly, cautiously, she shifted her weight, inching the phone further into the void, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. The beam danced across crumbling stone, then settled on a vast, dark mass that seemed to cling to the far wall, stretching from floor to an unseen ceiling. It wasn't a living creature, not in the traditional sense, but it pulsed with an undeniable malevolent presence. As her eyes adjusted and the light steadied, she saw it. Not a creature, but a monumental tapestry, so ancient and vast it seemed to be a part of the very bedrock of the house. It was woven from threads so dark they absorbed the light, almost like a shadow made manifest. It wasn't merely hung. It appeared to have been unfurling from a hidden recess in the wall, slowly, deliberately, as if an unseen hand was carefully revealing it. The rustling sound must have been the heavy, decaying fabric shifting, dislodging decades, maybe centuries of accumulated dust. The low sigh, perhaps the house itself, exhaling a long-held secret into the stale air. Emily swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. This wasn't just a hidden room. This was a forgotten chamber, a mausoleum of secrets. The tapestry, now fully revealed, was enormous, easily covering the entire back wall of the hidden space. Its design was intricate, disturbing. It depicted a sprawling, gnarled tree, its branches twisting into grotesque, almost skeletal forms. From these branches hung what looked like faceless figures, their silhouettes stark against a backdrop of swirling darkness. At the base of the tree, partially obscured by shadow and decay, were what appeared to be carved symbols, geometric patterns that seemed to writhe and shift under the flashlight's beam. A chill, colder than any draft, seeped into her bones. This wasn't just art. It felt like a warning, a prophecy, or perhaps a chilling record of something unspeakable. She zoomed in with her phone, trying to capture the details, her fingers fumbling with the controls. The air grew heavy, pressing down on her, making her chest ache. She felt an intense, irrational urge to touch the tapestry, to trace the chilling patterns with her fingers, to somehow absorb its history directly. But another part of her screamed not to, warned her that to touch it would be to invite whatever dark energy it contained to latch onto her. Suddenly, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the stone floor beneath her. Not an earthquake, but something localized, originating from within the very structure of the house. It felt like a deep, resonant hum, a low vibration that thrummed through her feet and up her spine. Then a new sound, distinct from the rustling and sighing, echoed from deeper within the hidden space, beyond the massive tapestry. A soft, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It was faint, barely audible over her own pounding heart, but undeniably there. It sounded like something heavy, perhaps a pendulum, or a slow, deliberate knocking. It was coming from behind the tapestry. Emily's breath hitched. There was more. There was always more. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the core that the tapestry was not the end. It was merely a curtain. Driven by a primal fear mixed with an insatiable need to understand, she pushed herself forward, her knees scraping against the rough stone. The space was claustrophobic, the air thick and heavy, making it hard to move. She reached the edge of the tapestry, its dark, coarse threads brushing against her outstretched hand, sending a jolt of static-like energy through her arm. It felt ancient, brittle, yet impossibly strong. She scanned the edges, looking for an opening, a seam, anything that would allow her to peer behind it. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump continued, a maddeningly slow rhythm that seemed to synchronize with her own racing pulse. It was almost hypnotic, pulling her deeper into the secret. Finally, at the very bottom right corner, she noticed it. A slight tear, a fraying of the heavy fabric where it met the stone floor. It was just large enough for her to wedge her phone's flashlight into, offering a sliver of illumination into the darkness beyond. What she saw made her gasp, a choked, strangled sound that died in her throat. Behind the tapestry, the hidden space continued, narrowing into what looked like a rough-hewn tunnel. And within that tunnel, illuminated by her phone's struggling beam, was a small, crudely constructed wooden table. On the table, centered perfectly, sat a single, plain, unlit candle. And next to the candle, a tarnished silver locket. But it wasn't the locket or the candle that made her blood run cold. It was the source of the persistent thump, thump, thump. Directly behind the table, embedded into the rough stone wall, was a small, ornate wooden clock. It was old, incredibly old, its dark wood carved with the same unsettling, gnarled tree motif seen on the tapestry. Its pendulum, a heavy, dark iron sphere, swung with agonizing slowness, each swing producing the deep, resonant thump that had drawn her in. The clock had no hands, no numbers, just the ceaseless, slow swing of its pendulum. And as her phone light lingered, Emily noticed something else. Etched into the base of the clock, almost invisible against the dark wood, were three distinct initials. M. 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 The Millers. Michael Miller. Mary Miller. Melanie Miller. A wave of nausea washed over Emily. This wasn't just a hidden room. It was a shrine, a macabre altar. And the clock, without hands, without numbers, yet still ticking, was a chilling representation of time stopped, or perhaps time running out. The locket, the candle, the initials, they were all too deliberate, too personal. This was not some random discovery. It was a message from the vanished, or perhaps from whatever had made them vanish. She felt an overwhelming sense of violation, as if she had stumbled upon a deeply personal, sacred, and terrifying ritual. The air grew even colder, and she could almost taste the fear that must have permeated this space for decades. She remembered the journal entries, the Millers' growing paranoia, their sense of being watched, of time slipping away. Was this clock the manifestation of that fear? A symbol of their ultimate fate? The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the pendulum seemed to grow louder, filling the entire hidden chamber, resonating not just in her ears but deep within her chest. It was no longer a distant sound. It was right there, a relentless countdown. A shiver tore through her deeper than before. She felt a profound sense of dread, a chilling certainty that she was not alone in this space. The house was awake, and it was watching her, through the eyes of that handless clock, through the shadows of the grotesque tapestry. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to retreat, to escape this suffocating crypt of secrets. But then, as her gaze lingered on the silver locket, she noticed a faint, almost imperceptible etching on its surface. A small stylized bird, its wings outstretched as if in flight. A bird she recognized. A bird that had been mentioned in Melanie Miller's journal. A small drawing she had made in the margins, a symbol of hope, or perhaps a desperate plea for freedom. Emily knew she had to get closer. She had to see what was inside that locket. It was a tangible link, a direct connection to the last family who had lived here. The thump, thump, thump continued its relentless rhythm, echoing the final, desperate heartbeats of the vanished Millers, and perhaps a warning of her own impending fate. She took a deep, shaky breath, her mind racing. This was no longer just a story. It was a direct confrontation, and she was standing on the precipice of a truth far darker and more intricate than she could have ever imagined. The house had laid its trap, and she had walked right into it, drawn by the siren song of its secrets. Now there was no turning back. She had to uncover what was behind the locket, what the bird symbolized, and what final agonizing tick of the clock had sealed the Miller's fate. The locket felt heavy in her palm, a cold metallic promise of answers. Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she tried to open it. It wasn't a simple clasp. There was no obvious hinge, no visible seam. She pressed, twisted, and pulled at every delicate curve, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Frustration began to prickle, but she pushed it down. This was it. This was the key. She examined the intricate bird carving again, tracing its wings with her thumb. The bird seemed to be perched, almost trapped, within the confines of the locket itself. What if the mechanism was hidden within the bird? She ran her finger along its tail feathers, then up its back and finally to its tiny head. There, barely perceptible, was a minuscule indentation, a pinprick that her nail could just catch. She pushed. A faint, almost inaudible click echoed in the silent room. The locket didn't spring open, but a hairline crack appeared along its side, revealing a hidden seam. With a gentle tug, the two have separated, not like a book, but more like a shell revealing its pearl. Inside, nestled within the hollow, was not a photograph, but a single tightly rolled piece of parchment, no bigger than her pinky finger. Emily carefully extracted the tiny scroll. Her hands, despite her earlier resolve, were now shaking visibly. She unrolled it with painstaking slowness, fearing it would crumble to dust. The paper was ancient, brittle, and covered in a faint, elegant script that looked like it belonged to another century. The ink had faded to a sepia tone, almost blending with the aged parchment. She held it closer, straining to read the words in the dim light of the study. The bird sings not from its gilded cage, but from the shadow of the true nest. When the clock strikes 7, look to the roots that bind. The 5th, the 12th, the 8th. Emily read the message 3 times, each word sinking deeper into her consciousness, chilling her to the bone. The bird, the gilded cage, the true nest, the clock striking 7, the roots that bind, the numbers 5, 12, 8. It was a riddle, a poetic set of instructions, and suddenly, the full weight of the Miller's disappearance felt heavier, more deliberate, more sinister than she had ever imagined. She immediately recognized the bird as the symbol from the locket, and from the strange recurring motif she'd seen throughout the house on the wallpaper, etched into the fireplace mantel, even in the pattern of a forgotten teacup in the kitchen. It was a nightingale, a bird known for its beautiful, melancholic song, and its elusive nature. Gilded cage could refer to the locket itself, or perhaps the house, a beautiful prison that trapped its inhabitants. But the true nest, that had to be a hidden location, a secret place. When the clock strikes 7, the tick of the clock, this wasn't merely a phrase. It was an instruction, a specific time. 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. Given the creeping dread of the house, 7 p.m. felt more ominous. And look to the roots that bind. This phrase resonated with a deep, unsettling ambiguity. Roots of a tree? Roots of the house, its foundation? Or something more abstract like the roots of a family, a lineage, a history? Then the numbers. The 5th, the 12th, the 8th. A sequence. A combination. A code? Emily's mind raced through possibilities. It couldn't be a date. There was no month. It had to be a key, a specific order of operations. Her gaze drifted around the study, a room steeped in history and shadow. Her eyes landed on an imposing antique grandfather clock in the corner. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its dark wood carved with elaborate, almost organic patterns that twisted and turned like ancient tree roots. It had never worked since she'd moved in. Its pendulum forever still, its chime silent. But the message explicitly mentioned a clock, and the phrase "roots that bind" suddenly seemed to echo the clock's intricate carvings. Could this be the gilded cage that held the secret of the true nest? Emily approached the clock, a tremor of anticipation running through her. The wood was cool beneath her fingertips. She ran her hand over the carvings, following the sinuous lines that indeed resembled gnarled roots intertwining. It was almost as if the clock itself was alive, its wooden veins pulsing with a dormant secret. This had to be it. She examined the clock face, its Roman numerals frozen at 10 minutes past 2. She looked at the ornate weights hanging inside, the silent pendulum. Where would the 5th, the 12th, the 8th fit in? She thought about the common features of a grandfather clock. The face, the pendulum, the weights, the chime mechanism, the base. The numbers could refer to a sequence of interactions, a specific set of buttons to press, or even a hidden combination. Emily started at the base, running her hands along the polished wood. Nothing. She moved up to the pendulum door, tracing the edge, looking for a seam. Still nothing. Then her eyes fell on the intricate carvings again, particularly a section near the top, just below the clock face, where the roots seemed to converge into a dense, almost knot-like pattern. There were small, raised bumps within the carving, almost like tiny decorative buttons, but they were so flush with the wood, she dismissed them as mere adornments before. She counted them. There were exactly 13 of these small circular bumps, arranged in an irregular pattern around a central, slightly larger circle. Could these be the keys to the numbers? The 5th, the 12th, the 8th. Emily took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She carefully pressed the 5th bump she encountered as she traced the pattern clockwise. Nothing. She tried again, counting from a different starting point, a different direction. Still nothing. Frustration began to mount, her earlier clarity dissolving into a haze of confusion. Then she remembered the other part of the clue. When the clock struck 7, it wasn't just a time to look, it was a time for action. She glanced at her watch. It was almost 6:45 p.m. She had 15 minutes. She decided to wait. The air in the study grew heavy with anticipation as the minutes crawled by. Each tick of her own wristwatch seemed to amplify the silence of the old house. Emily stood there, eyes fixed on the grandfather clock, a silent sentinel in the encroaching gloom. The light outside was fading, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. Finally, her watch displayed 7 p.m. The silence of the house was absolute, almost suffocating. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine, a primal instinct screaming at her to flee. But the pull of the mystery, the desperate need to understand the Miller's fate, was stronger. She returned to the clock, her fingers trembling once more. This time, as she ran her hand over the root-like carvings, she felt for a subtle difference, a loose part. And there it was. Not a button but a small, almost invisible segment of the carving, just below the number 7 on the clock face, that felt slightly different, a fraction of an inch deeper than the surrounding wood. It was barely noticeable, almost as if it was meant to be overlooked. She pressed it gently. A faint click, softer than the lockets, emanated from within the clock's wooden shell. Then a small, narrow panel, almost imperceptible against the dark wood, slid open at the very bottom of the clock, just above its base. It was a hidden compartment, perfectly integrated into the roots that bind. Emily's breath hitched. She knelt down, her heart hammering against her ribs. Reaching into the dark recess, her fingers brushed against something cold and smooth, then something soft and brittle. She pulled out the contents. First, a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with age, its pages brittle. Then a single dried, dark red rose, its petals almost black with time, carefully pressed flat. And finally, a small, intricate brass key, unlike any she had ever seen, adorned with a tiny, stylized bird's head on its bow. The journal. It had to be Sarah Miller's. Emily clutched the journal, her fingers tracing the faint, almost ghostly inscription on its cover. SM. She opened it, her hands still trembling. The first few pages were neat, mundane entries about daily life, children's milestones, garden plans, normal domestic life. Then the handwriting began to change, becoming more rushed, more frantic. The ink pressed harder into the page. The entries grew shorter, punctuated by exclamation points and desperate questions. Asterisk June 14th. Heard the whispers again. They're getting louder. David says it's just the old house settling. He doesn't believe me. He doesn't understand. Asterisk. Asterisk June 20th. The bird. It's always the bird. I see it in my dreams. I hear its song when there is no bird. It's calling to me, calling us. From the shadow of the true nest. What does it want? Asterisk. Asterisk July 1st. The children, they're starting to see things too. Little Michael talks about the man in the shadows in his room. Jessica hums a tune I've never taught her, a mournful song. The nightingales lament. Oh God, what have we done? Asterisk. Emily flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning for answers, for any explanation of what had driven the Miller family to vanish. The desperation in Sarah's words was palpable, a chilling echo across the years. She read faster, deeper into the journal, her own fear mounting with every word. Then she found it. An entry dated July 15th, just days before the Millers disappeared. The handwriting was almost illegible, scrawled with a frantic energy that spoke of pure terror. Asterisk July 15th. It's here. It wants its due. The payment. The house. It's not just a house. It's a keep or a prison. It took the Blackwoods before us and now it wants us. The bird. It guides the way but not to freedom, to the deeper nest. There's a pact, a terrible ancient pact with the land itself, with something that lives beneath these stones, that feeds on the passage of time, on the very life force of those who dwell here. It promises sanctuary but demands a soul. We tried to leave. It wouldn't let us. The clock is running out. We are the final payment. We are the last. Asterisk. The entry ended abruptly, the sentence unfinished, trailing off into a frantic, ink-stained scribble. Emily stared at the page, her blood running cold. The Blackwoods. Another family. The house wasn't just a place where people vanished. It was a hungry entity, an ancient trap. The tick of the clock wasn't just a metaphor. It was a countdown to a terrifying payment. As she absorbed the horrifying revelation, a faint, almost imperceptible creak echoed from somewhere deep within the house, not from the floorboards or the wind, but from within the very walls themselves. It was a sound that seemed to acknowledge her presence, a soft, deliberate sigh, as if the house itself had just awakened, now fully aware that its newest inhabitant had discovered its oldest, darkest secret. The soft, deliberate sigh from within the walls didn't just acknowledge Emily. It seemed to resonate deep within her own chest, a cold echo of something ancient and malevolent. Her breath hitched, caught in her throat, a tiny strangled sound swallowed by the sudden, profound silence that descended upon the house. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence, pressing down on her, stealing the warmth from her skin. Every nerve ending screamed at her to flee, to abandon this house, this cursed secret, and never look back. But a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand the chilling truth of the Miller family's vanishing, rooted her to the spot. Slowly, carefully, Emily reached out again, her fingers trembling as they traced the faint outline of the hidden seam in the wallpaper. The sigh had come from here, from this very spot, a confirmation that her intuition had been terrifyingly accurate. This wasn't just a structural anomaly. It was a deliberate concealment. She pressed harder, feeling the slight give she'd noticed before. But now it felt different, less like a loose panel and more like a door, a threshold waiting to be crossed. Summoning every ounce of courage she possessed, Emily pushed. First nothing. Then, with a low grinding groan that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the house, a section of the wall, about 3 feet wide and 6 feet tall, slowly, agonizingly, began to pivot inward. It wasn't a door with hinges, it was a perfectly balanced section of the wall itself, designed to recede into the darkness beyond, leaving barely a whisper of its existence once closed. A gust of stale, frigid air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of dust, damp earth, and something metallic, something vaguely reminiscent of old iron, and something else, something indescribably organic and unsettling. Emily recoiled, a gasp escaping her lips as the sliver of space widened, revealing not another room, but a narrow vertical shaft of absolute darkness. It plunged downwards, an inky abyss that seemed to drink the meager light from her phone, offering no hint of its depth or what lay at its bottom. Her phone flashlight, usually a comforting beacon, now seemed pitifully weak against the overwhelming void. She peered into the opening, heart hammering against her ribs. The shaft was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through, a tight, claustrophobic descent into the unknown. There were no visible stairs, no ladder, just rough-hewn stone walls, slick with what felt like decades of accumulated moisture. As she stood there, paralyzed by a mixture of dread and fascination, a faint, rhythmic thump, 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 began to echo from somewhere deep within the shaft. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but undeniably present, a heartbeat reverberating through the earth itself. It wasn't the sound of an animal, nor the settling of a house. It was too deliberate, too steady, too alive. Emily's mind reeled. Had the Millers found this? Were they trapped down there? Or had they been lured? The implications were horrifying. She thought of Michael, of Jessica, of little David and Emily Miller. Had they descended into this very darkness? She knew with a chilling certainty that she couldn't leave it. Not now. The house had shown her its secret, and now she had to understand why. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she edged closer to the opening. The thumping grew slightly louder, a slow, methodical pulse. She needed to see. She needed to know. But before she could even contemplate entering, a new sound pierced the oppressive silence. A soft, almost playful tinkle came from the living room below. It was the wind chimes, the ones she'd carefully packed away in a box in the attic, the very one she'd found in the Miller's old storage box. They were now chiming merrily, as if a gentle breeze had swept through the otherwise still house. But there was no breeze. The windows were all closed. A cold dread seeped into Emily's bones. The wind chimes weren't just chiming. They were singing, a mocking ethereal melody. And then a whisper, so faint she almost dismissed it as her imagination, brushed past her ear. It was indistinct, a jumble of syllables, but one word seemed to detach itself from the murmuring chorus. Welcome. Her blood ran cold. The house wasn't just aware. It was communicating. It was inviting her in. Emily gripped her phone tighter, its light dancing nervously in the darkness of the shaft. She had to be careful. This wasn't just an empty void, it was a trap, a lure. She remembered the strange symbols, the fragmented journal entries. The Millers had been obsessed with something. They had been researching, trying to understand. And now, Emily was standing on the precipice of their ultimate discovery, or their ultimate downfall. She noticed something else then, just at the edge of the opening, where the rough stone met the floorboards. A faint, almost invisible etching. She knelt down, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, and brought her phone closer. It was a symbol, similar to the one she'd seen in the journal, but more complex, a circular design with interlocking lines and a central, almost eye-like motif. It was etched into the stone subtly, as if meant to be overlooked by anyone not actively searching. And then just below it, a single faded word, barely legible in the dim light. Keeper. Keeper? Keeper of what? The secret? The mechanism? The house itself? The word sent a shiver down her spine, a profound sense of unease. It implied a guardian, a purpose, a long-standing duty. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump from the shaft intensified slightly, as if the keeper was responding, acknowledging her discovery. Emily felt a primal urge to scream, to run, but her feet remained rooted. She was too close. The truth, however horrific, was within reach. She leaned into the opening, trying to discern anything concrete in the impenetrable darkness below. Her phone light barely penetrated a few feet before being swallowed. But as her eyes adjusted, she thought she saw a faint, almost imperceptible glow deep, deep down. It was a dull reddish hue like embers dying in a distant forge, or perhaps blood. The whisper returned, closer this time, coiling around her like an icy mist. This time it wasn't a jumble. It was clearer, distinctly feminine, and utterly devoid of warmth. He waits, Emily gasped, stumbling back from the opening, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a cry. He? Who was he? The Millers' disappearance had always felt like a family affair, a collective vanishing. But this whisper, this single word, shifted the entire narrative. Was there one entity, one presence at the heart of it all? She backed away further, her gaze fixed on the dark maw, the rhythmic thumping a relentless soundtrack to her mounting terror. The wall panel, which had swung inward, now seemed to pulse with a faint internal luminescence, almost as if the stone itself was alive, absorbing and reflecting the secrets it held. Emily knew she couldn't just descend blindly. She needed more information, a plan. She needed to understand what she was facing. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments, the journal entries about the veil and the threshold, the strange symbols, the Miller family's growing paranoia, their desperate attempts to seal something away. Was this shaft the threshold? Was the keeper the one maintaining the veil? She thought of the strange, almost ritualistic arrangement of objects she'd found in the attic, the dried herbs, the carefully placed stones. Had the Millers been trying to ward off whatever was down there? Or were they trying to appease it? The chimes in the living room tinkled again, a louder, more insistent melody this time, followed by a soft, almost mournful creak from the floorboards below. The house was no longer subtle. It was active. It was responding to her every thought, her every movement. It was a living, breathing entity, and she was trapped within its lungs. Emily glanced around the attic, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow. She needed something, anything to help her. Her gaze fell upon the sturdy, weathered rope she'd found earlier, coiled neatly in the corner, part of the miller's old camping gear. It was strong, thick, and long enough to reach. A lifeline, perhaps, or a means to descend. But before she could move towards it, a new sound erupted from the depths of the shaft. Not a thump, not a whisper, but a low guttural growl, a sound that resonated with ancient hunger and boundless malice. It was deep, primal, and undeniably animalistic, yet tinged with an intelligence that made it infinitely more terrifying. It wasn't just a beast, it was something that knew. The faint red glow from below intensified, pulsing in time with the growl, casting grotesque, dancing shadows up the rough stone walls of the shaft. The air grew colder, the metallic tang stronger, and Emily could swear she felt a tangible pressure, a massive unseen weight pressing against the opening, trying to force its way out. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't a trick of the light or a settling house. This was something real, something horrifyingly physical, and it was alive. And it was waiting for her. Overcoming the paralyzing fear, a surge of adrenaline finally kicked in. Emily had to act. She couldn't leave this unexplored. Not with the miller's fate hanging in the balance. Not with that ominous growl echoing in her ears. She had to find out what he was and what he wanted. The house had given her the key. Now she had to unlock the terrifying truth. The question was, would she survive the unlocking? She edged back towards the opening, her phone held aloft, its beam struggling to pierce the malevolent gloom. The growl was now a continuous low rumble, vibrating through the floorboards, through her very bones. The red glow pulsed, brighter now, revealing fleeting glimpses of something formless and vast at the bottom of the shaft. Emily knew with absolute certainty that she was no longer just investigating a mystery. She was walking into a confrontation with the very thing that had consumed the Miller family, and now it was ready for her. The house had opened its mouth, and she was about to step inside. The only way out was through. Emily stepped across the threshold. The air inside didn't just feel cold. It felt heavy, like a blanket woven from silence and unseen pressure. The familiar scent of old wood and dust was now laced with something else. A faint metallic tang, like ozone after a lightning strike, or perhaps something older, more organic. The hallway stretched before her, impossibly long, the shadows deepening at the far end, twisting into shapes that weren't quite furniture, not quite wall. The front door, which she had just pushed open, seemed to swing shut behind her with a soft thud that vibrated through the floorboards, not from a draft, but from an unseen hand. The lock clicked. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching quiet. This wasn't the empty, abandoned house she'd explored before. This was a presence. It was awake. It was waiting. She pulled out her phone, the flashlight beam cutting a stark path through the gloom. The light felt weak, almost absorbed by the oppressive atmosphere. She walked slowly, her footsteps unnaturally loud, echoing back to her as if the house itself was mimicking her movements. She reached the living room, the one with the empty picture frames. Now they weren't just empty, they were shimmering. A faint, almost imperceptible distortion rippled across the glass, like heat haze but cold. She peered closer, seeing not her reflection but brief, fleeting blurs of faces, not the Millers but others. Older faces, distorted, gone as quickly as they appeared. The house was showing her fragments, whispers from its past. She moved deeper, drawn by an invisible current, towards the kitchen. The kitchen where the Miller family had shared their last meal. The table was still there, now covered in a fine layer of dust, but the chairs were no longer neatly tucked in. One was overturned, another was pulled back, as if someone had just risen from it in a hurry. A single tarnished silver spoon lay on the floor, glinting dully in her phone's beam. Emily felt a surge of dread. This wasn't just residual energy. It was a replay, a manifestation. The house was replaying their last moments. Was it trying to show her something, or was it trying to trap her in their fear? She continued past the kitchen towards the back of the house, where David Miller had spent his final tormented days. The study. The door was ajar. A sliver of darkness beckoned her in. As she approached, a low hum began to vibrate through the air, barely audible, like a distant massive generator. It grew stronger as she pushed the door fully open. The study was different. The desk was still there, but now, scattered across it were not just Silas Blackwood's journals, but more journals. Miller's journals. His frantic scrawl filled page after page, stacked haphazardly, intermingled with old newspaper clippings about the house's history, maps of the property, and strange geometric diagrams she didn't understand. The hum intensified, coming from the corner of the room, behind a large old bookcase that looked like it had been built into the wall. She pushed against it, testing its stability. It didn't budge, but the hum was definitively coming from behind it. "What did you find, David?" Emily whispered, her voice barely a breath. She scanned the desk. Her eyes landed on a loose page, not from a journal, but a single sheet of paper folded precisely. She unfolded it. It was a crude drawing, almost childlike, of the house. But beneath it, in bold, shaky letters, were two words: the root. The root. What did that mean? Her gaze snapped back to the bookcase. The hum was now almost a drone, a low thrumming that resonated in her bones. She noticed a faint line along the edge of the bookcase, a hairline crack in the wood, suggesting it wasn't just a bookcase, but a hidden door. She ran her fingers along it, searching for a latch, a mechanism. Nothing. Then she saw it. Tucked beneath a stack of Silas's journals, a small, ornate key. Not an old skeleton key, but a more modern, intricate one. It looked out of place, almost new. She picked it up. It felt warm in her palm. She looked at the bookcase again. There had to be a lock. Her eyes darted around, then landed on a small, almost invisible keyhole, cleverly disguised within the carved ornamentation of the bookcase itself. It was hidden in plain sight, part of a vine pattern. With trembling fingers, Emily inserted the key. Slid in smoothly. A soft click echoed through the room, louder than it should have been in the oppressive silence. The hum behind the bookcase swelled, then died down to a faint pulse. She pushed. The bookcase, with a groan of ancient wood, swung inwards, revealing a narrow, dark passage. The air that wafted out was thick with a strange, earthy smell, mixed with something metallic and sweet, like decaying flowers and blood. Emily hesitated. This was it. This was the heart of the mystery. This was what the Millers had found. This was the root. She stepped into the darkness. The passage was unlit, the walls rough-hewn stone, not plaster and lath. It descended steeply, spiraling downwards. Her phone's light struggled to penetrate the absolute blackness. She could feel the dampness on the walls, hear the drip of water somewhere far below. The air grew colder, the scent stronger. It was the smell of a crypt, of something ancient and buried. She kept going, her hand brushing against the cold, rough stone. The passage opened into a larger space. It wasn't a basement. It was a cavern, a vast, echoing chamber, illuminated by an eerie, pulsing green light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The light pulsed slowly like a giant unseen heart. And in the center of this cavern, dominating the space, was the root. It wasn't a tree root. It was a massive organic structure, unlike anything Emily had ever seen. It rose from the cavern floor, a grotesque, pulsating column of intertwining tendrils, dark and glistening, like petrified muscle and sinew. It was almost alive, slowly contracting and expanding with the green light. Seemed to be feeding on something. Around the base of this monstrous root, arranged in a perfect circle, were dozens of the perfectly preserved objects she'd seen in the house. The antique dolls, the porcelain figurines, the intricate music boxes, the polished silver candlesticks. Each one glowed faintly with the same green light, connected to the central structure by thin, almost invisible filaments that pulsed with energy. They weren't just objects, they were offerings. Emily stumbled back, a gasp caught in her throat. This was what Silas Blackwood had found. This was what David Miller had become obsessed with. This wasn't a normal house. It was a vessel. As she stared horrified, she saw something else. Embedded within the glistening surface of the root, barely visible beneath the pulsing light, were faint, indistinct shapes. Faces. Not carved but formed. Faces of fear, of despair, of agony. And among them, she could almost make out the tortured features of Sarah Miller. And then, horrifyingly, the wide, terrified eyes of young Michael Miller. The root was consuming them. It was feeding on their essence, their memories, their fear. It wasn't just a house. It was a parasitic organism. A psychic predator that had taken root beneath the land, drawing sustenance from the lives and emotions of those who lived above it. A voice, not a sound she heard with her ears, but a thought that echoed directly in her mind, filled the cavern. It was ancient, vast, and horribly familiar. It was the voice of the house. "You found it." The thought resonated, cold and possessive. Another offering. Emily felt a crushing weight descend upon her. A wave of despair and hopelessness so profound it threatened to buckle her knees. This was the despair that had consumed the Millers. This was the source of their madness. The house wasn't haunted. It was the haunting. She tried to scream, but no sound came. Her mind reeled. She understood now. The perfectly preserved objects weren't just cherished possessions. They were anchors, conduits through which the root drew its energy, preserving the essence of its victims in a grotesque, eternal tableau. The garden outside, always perfect, always blooming. It was just another part of the facade. A lure, a mirror of false perfection sustained by the terror below. The green light intensified, pulsing faster, and the tendrils of the root seemed to stretch, almost reaching for her. The faces embedded within it shimmered, their silent screams echoing in her mind. "Join them." The voice whispered. "Asterisk, become part of the garden. Become eternal." Asterisk. Emily felt a profound sense of exhaustion wash over her. Her grief for Alex, her anger, her drive for answers. It all felt meaningless, swallowed by the sheer ancient malevolence of this thing. She understood the Miller's surrender. It was overwhelming, but then a flicker. A memory of Alex's laugh, a flash of his determined eyes. He wouldn't have given up. He would have fought. She looked at the root, at the faces of its victims, and then her eyes landed on a small, smooth stone, lying on the cavern floor near the edge of the pulsating structure. It was the stone Alex had given her, the one she'd kept in her pocket, the one that meant hope. The root pulsed, its tendrils vibrating with anticipation. It was waiting for her to break, to surrender. Emily took a deep, shuddering breath. She had come here for answers, and she had found them. Horrifying answers. But she wasn't going to become another face in its grotesque tapestry. She wasn't going to be another offering. Her eyes hardened. She had to fight. But how do you fight a parasitic entity that feeds on fear and despair? An entity that is literally the foundation of the house itself. She remembered something else David Miller had written in his frantic notes, something he'd scribbled repeatedly. Sever the connections. Break the mirror. The objects. The perfect, preserved objects. They were the connections. They were the mirror. With a surge of adrenaline that temporarily pushed back the crushing despair, Emily looked around the cavern. The pulsing green light, the silent, screaming faces, the hum that vibrated through her teeth. She had to sever the connections. She had to break the mirror. But how? And what would happen if she did? The root seemed to sense her defiance. The hum intensified into a shriek, and the tendrils began to writhe, reaching out closer, faster. The faces within it seemed to twist in agony, or perhaps in warning. Emily knew one thing for certain. She was not leaving this house the same way she came in, and if she didn't find a way to stop this thing, she wouldn't be leaving at all. The house had opened its mouth, and she was inside. The only way out was through. And now she understood through meant confronting the very heart of its evil. The house had opened its mouth, and she was inside. The only way out was through. And now she understood through meant confronting the very heart of its evil. A chill far deeper than any she'd felt before permeated the walls, seeping into her bones. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and something metallic, like old blood. She knew David was somewhere in this labyrinth, a pawn in the house's game, a lure. His survival, her survival, depended on her next move. The entity wanted to make her another ghost, another whisper in its endless halls, but she wouldn't yield. Not now. Her mind raced, sifting through the fragmented entries in the journals, the cryptic warnings, the desperate pleas of those who had come before. The binding. It wasn't just a metaphor for attachment. It was a literal act, a dark tether established at the house's inception, drawing in and consuming the very essence of families who sought to make it a home. To undo the binding, she had to find its source, its anchor. She remembered Mrs. Albright's strange obsession with the house's roots, the way it seemed to grow from the very earth, and the old faded blueprint she'd found in the attic, detailing a peculiar, unlisted chamber beneath the original foundation, marked only with a symbol that looked eerily like a gnarled hand clutching a single stylized heart. That had to be it. The basement. She descended the creaking steps, the darkness swallowing her, the air growing colder, heavier. Each step echoed not just her own movement, but a chorus of phantom footsteps, shuffling, dragging, whispers brushing past her ears, names she didn't know, pleas she couldn't understand. The house was throwing everything at her, a desperate symphony of dread, trying to break her spirit before she could reach its core. She reached the bottom, the flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive gloom. Cobwebs clung like phantom shrouds, and the earth floor was uneven, cold, damp. The scent of mold and something ancient, something buried, was overpowering. She scanned the rough-hewn stone walls, searching for any anomaly. There, behind a crumbling section of loose bricks, almost invisible beneath layers of grime and neglect, was a faint outline, a hairline crack. It was a doorway expertly concealed. With a surge of adrenaline, fueled by a primal fury, she began to pry at the bricks. They were heavy, cemented with something more than mortar. A resistance, almost a living force pushing back. The whispers intensified, morphing into guttural growls, then piercing screams that seemed to tear at the fabric of the air itself. Visions flickered in her peripheral vision. Distorted faces, skeletal hands reaching out from the shadows, the fleeting image of David, pale and lifeless, his eyes wide with terror. A cold dread twisted in her gut. This was a trick, a final desperate attempt to break her resolve. She closed her eyes for a moment, forcing the images away, and focused on the physical act, on the cold, gritty feel of the bricks against her hands. She wouldn't let it win. Not now. Not ever. Finally, with a groan of displaced stone and a shower of dust, a section of the wall gave way, revealing a narrow, dark passage, barely wide enough to crawl through. The air that rushed out was stale, metallic, and heavy with a palpable sense of malevolence. This was it. The heart of the house. She squeezed through the opening, flashlight held steady, crawling on hands and knees through the tight, claustrophobic space. The passage opened into a small, circular chamber, no more than 6 feet in diameter, directly beneath the house's original cornerstone. The walls here were not stone, but smooth, dark, polished obsidian, reflecting the flashlight beam like a black mirror. In the very center of the chamber, resting on a pedestal carved from the same dark stone, was the object. It was a small, intricately carved wooden box, no larger than a shoebox, but radiating an oppressive energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. It wasn't beautiful. It was unsettling. Carved into its surface were symbols she recognized from the journals, the gnarled hand, the stylized heart, and others that looked like twisted vines binding marks. It was old, impossibly old, its wood dark and smooth from centuries of unseen contact. And from within it, a faint rhythmic pulse throbbed, a low hum that resonated in her teeth. As she reached out a hesitant hand, the chamber around her flared with an invisible energy. The obsidian walls seemed to ripple, and within their depths, she saw them. Hundreds, thousands of faces, indistinct, swirling, twisting, their mouths open in silent screams. The vanished families. They weren't just gone. They were trapped within this box, within the house, their essences feeding its endless hunger. The house wasn't just a structure. It was a prison, a tomb, and this box was its key, its anchor, its heart. A voice, not a whisper this time, but a cacophony of voices, all speaking as one, boomed through the chamber, vibrating in her chest. "You belong here, Emily. This is your home now. You will never leave. We will be together. Forever." The voice was seductive, terrifying, promising a twisted sense of belonging, a grotesque parody of family. She saw David then, truly saw him, not an illusion. He was slumped against the far wall of the chamber, pale and unconscious, a thin trickle of blood from his temple. The house had brought him here to witness her fate, to be part of its collection. A fresh wave of rage, cold and clear, washed over her, incinerating any remaining fear. The journals. She remembered the last desperate entry, a half-mad scrawl by a woman named Sarah from the 1930s. To break the binding, it read, "One must sever the roots, reject the home, declare it empty, unclaimed, unhomed. The house thrives on belonging. Deny it, reject it." But how? She couldn't just walk away. The house had its grip on David. The box pulsed, growing brighter, its malevolent hum intensifying. It was trying to draw her in, to consume her. She looked at the box, then at David, then back at the swirling faces in the obsidian walls. She was a realtor. Her job was to sell homes, to connect people to properties, to create that very sense of belonging the house craved. But she also understood the opposite: dispossession, abandonment, the severing of ties. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she placed both hands flat on the cold, dark wood of the box. A jolt like an electric shock shot through her, trying to pull her in, to bind her. She fought it, gritting her teeth, her knuckles white. "This is not a home," she declared, her voice trembling but firm, echoing through the chamber, momentarily silencing the phantom screams. "This is a trap. This is a prison." The box vibrated violently beneath her hands, and the faces in the walls writhed. The entity was fighting back, its power surging. "You have no claim," she continued, pushing through the resistance, focusing all her will, all her anger, all her love for David into her words. "You are abandoned. You are empty. You are unclaimed." The chamber began to shake violently, dust and small pebbles raining down from the ceiling. Cracks spiderwebbed across the obsidian walls, and the faces within them began to distort, to dissipate like smoke. The rhythmic pulse from the box grew erratic, stuttering, weakening. "I sever all ties," she screamed, her voice raw, pouring every ounce of her being into the declaration. "This house is not a home. It is a shell, a void. It is unhomed." With a final ear-splitting shriek that seemed to tear the very air apart, the box shattered beneath her hands. Not exploding but imploding, collapsing into a pile of dark, crumbling dust that instantly vanished into the earth floor as if it had never been. The violent shaking of the chamber ceased abruptly. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a sudden, almost suffocating warmth. The obsidian walls, now deeply fractured, no longer showed the swirling faces. They were just dark, cracked stone. The malevolent hum was gone. The silence that followed was profound, absolute, almost deafening after the cacophony. She stumbled back, gasping for breath, her hands stinging, her whole body aching as if she'd run a marathon. The entity was gone, or at least its anchor was destroyed. She rushed to David, shaking him gently. His eyelids fluttered, and a low groan escaped his lips. "Emily," he mumbled, his eyes unfocused. What happened?" "It's over," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes, a wave of immense relief washing over her. "It's over. We have to go. Now." Helping him to his feet, supporting his weight, they stumbled back through the narrow passage, back through the basement and up the stairs. The house felt different now. Still ancient, still creaking, but the oppressive dread was gone. The whispers were silent. The shadows were just shadows. It was just a house. An old empty house. They emerged into the fading daylight, blinking against the sudden brightness. The world outside felt vibrant, alive, almost painfully real after the suffocating unreality of the last hours. They didn't look back. They just kept walking, away from the silent, imposing structure that stood stark against the evening sky. Later, from the safety of her own home, wrapped in a blanket, a warm cup of tea in her hands, Emily stared at the news report on her tablet. The old house on Elm Street. It had been condemned, deemed structurally unsound, slated for demolition. No new families would ever try to make it a home. No new families would vanish. The mystery of the previous families remained, their fates still unknown, their essences irrevocably bound to the shattered heart of the house, but the active threat was gone. She closed her eyes, the image of the shattered box, the vanished dust burned into her memory. She had faced the darkness, not with a weapon, but with an understanding of its twisted hunger. She had given it nothing, and in giving it nothing, she had taken everything. But sometimes, late at night, in the quiet moments before sleep, a faint, almost imperceptible chill would brush past her. A whisper like dry leaves skittering across an empty porch. And she would wonder, was it truly gone? Or was the house merely dormant, its roots severed, but its memory lingering, waiting for the next whisper of a family, waiting for the next heartbeat that dared to call it home? The house stood empty now, a silent sentinel, its secrets buried, its hunger stilled, but never truly forgotten. The last family that lived in that house vanished. But Emily, she had walked away.